Hi, I'm Larry Janeski, President of Basement Systems. We call the Sanidry basement air system a basement miracle machine. In this video, I want to show you how it works and why we call it that. The Sanidry is a 100-pint dehumidification system, but it's more than that. It has particulate filtration and humidity control in a single unit. The Sanidry, first of all, has a pre-filter that takes out all the dust bunnies from the air before the air gets to a MERV 11 filter. Now, a MERV 11 filter is a very fine filter. It filters out particles in the air down to 2 microns in size. It will take out all the particles 2 microns or larger, and that includes all mold spores and other dust particles, including the #1 indoor allergen, which is dust mite droppings. And the MERV 11 filter will take out 50% of the particles greater than 1 micron in size, and that's a very good filter. The pre-filter can be washed out in the sink when it gets dusty. It's important to keep the dehumidifier clean on the inside because if dust gets clogged up in the coils inside, it'll block the airflow. So that's another reason that we filter the air. The main filter can be changed at intervals whenever it gets dirty, and every basement will vary, but usually once a year is enough to change the main filter. The Sanidry is a 100-pint dehumidifier. In other words, it's rated to take out 100 pints of water from the air every 24 hours, but that rating is tested at the industry standard of 80-degree air, 60% relative humidity. All dehumidifiers are rated in this environment. Even a household dehumidifier that you buy at the big box store, that's a 40-pint dehumidifier, just a little bitty one, is rated 40 pints per day at 80 degrees, 60% relative humidity. So that's how we compare them. Now some ask, well, gee whiz, the Sanidry seems to be 2.5 times as effective as a 40-pint dehumidifier. Is that true? Well, let's take a look. First of all, we find a big problem. In a basement, we don't have 80-degree air. We have 68-degree air. Now, we know that the warmer the air, the bigger the air is. So 80-degree air is big air. And it's holding 60% of the maximum amount of water it can hold when these industry standard tests are done. Now, in a basement, if we have 68-degree air, that's much smaller air, and it holds a lot less water. And in order to dehumidify the air, we have to cool it first. So it's easy to cool 80-degree air because it's pretty hot air. So to cool it is an easy thing. But the lower temperature we go, like in the air temperature in a basement or a crawl space, the less of a spread we have between the temperature of the air that we're starting with and the freezing temperature, which of course is 32. So, the challenge for dehumidification systems is to be very efficient at lower air temperatures, at least the dehumidification systems we're going to use in a basement or a crawl space. So what we find is at 68 degrees, the temperatures that we find in crawl spaces and basements, that the Sanidry is not going to take out 100 pints per day. It may take out, let's say, 60 pints per day. So it drops off as the temperature goes down. But that household dehumidifier that's rated at 40 pints, the little one, that are very common that we see, might drop from their original rating of 40 pints down to as little as 6 or 8 pints per day at a cooler temperature that we commonly find in a basement or crawl space. So we're really comparing 8 pints to 60 pints. And if we look at it that way, the Sanidry is 6 or 7 or 8 times as effective as a household dehumidifier. And hey, if the small household dehumidifier is not going to do it for you, if it's chugging away in the corner, not moving a lot of air, not reducing the relative humidity in the basement and never shutting off, not only is it using more energy that way, but it's not keeping the relative humidity in your basement down below 60% where mold cannot grow. If it doesn't do the job, it's not worth anything. So how can it do that? How can the Sanidry be so much more effective? And very exciting that it's Energy Star rated. It takes that much water, that much more water out of the air than a household dehumidifier at the same amount of power usage. In other words, This unit takes 6.4 amps, and typically a 40-pint dehumidifier would have 6.5 to 7 amps of electricity, close to the same. So we got much more water out of the air for the same electricity. How can it do that? Well, one big reason is the heat exchange core. If we look under the filters here, we see this material here. This is a heat exchange core. And this is what that looks like. And this is one of the reasons the Sanidry is so big, because this heat exchange core is positioned right here inside the unit. Now, this heat exchange core, we can see through this way, and we can see through this way. And it's positioned up here. And what happens is the air comes into the top of the unit, it gets filtered very well, then it goes through the heat exchange core this way. Then it goes over the cold coil, and it cools, the cold coil cools the air, it drops the moisture out of the air, and then rather than just blowing that air out the back of the unit, we're taking that cool air and we're bringing it through the heat exchange core this way. And then we bring it down the back of the unit over the hot coil and out the blower. So what we've done is we've cooled the air over the cold coil, and then we've taken that cool air and pre-cooled through the heat exchange core the new incoming air. Why is that important? You see, in order to cool the air has to be in contact with cold surfaces. And the amount of time that the air is in contact with cold surfaces, we call that the resident time. So the longer the air is in contact with cold surfaces, the more it's going to cool and the more water is going to drop out of it. That's how a dehumidifier works. That's the magic of it. But a little household dehumidifier with a little squirrely spiral coil has a very small coil to it. And the blower is very small as well, because if we blew air over that tiny little coil very quickly, the air would go by that coil so quickly and we have basically zero resident time, and it wouldn't take any water out of the air at all. So we have a small cold coil and a small fan in a household dehumidifier. If you put your hand on the front and back of a household dehumidifier, you can't really tell. Is it blowing front to back or back to front? I can feel some air movement, but I can't really tell which way it's blowing. That's because it's got such a small blower on it, because the whole thing is a very small, light-duty type of unit. The Sanidry has a 250 CFM blower. 250 cubic feet of air per minute is blowing out of this unit, and it's going all through the room, mixing through the space. The dry air is drying the building materials, drying the contents of your basement, and then, of course, for every cubic foot of air that's going out, that much is coming in. It's drawing new air back in. It's drying it effectively after it filters it. And it's very effective at drying the space and making smells go away. So how can we have such a big blower in this thing and still have resident time? Well, this heat exchange core is the reason. We can blow air very quickly through here because we have a lot of cold surface area. Besides this heat exchange core, we have the coils inside here. And as you can see, these things are like truck radiators. There's lots of cold coil surface area on this big cold coil, so that we can have our air in contact with cold surfaces for long periods of time. If we take a look at this unit with the side cover off, we can see that the air will go through the air filter, through the heat exchange core, comes out the front this way. There's a tray here that collects all the water that drops out of the cold coil, and we even get water condensing and dropping right off the heat exchange core. That's how effective this is. So the air comes, it gets cooled, it comes to the front, it goes up this way, goes through the heat exchange core that way, goes down the back of the unit over the hot coil that's down there in the back, and then through the blower and out the back of the unit. The Sanidry drains through a hose out the back of the unit, and this can be stuck into a sump hole, into a water guard port, into a drain system, a floor drain, or if there's no place to run it, a condensate pump can be installed on the back of the unit. These two holes right here are lined up so the condensate pump can screw to the back of the unit, and then you'll cut this hose short and knock one of these knockouts out in the condensate pump and stick the hose inside there. And now you will run, with the condensate pump kit, you get 25 feet of clear tubing that you stick onto this nipple on the condensate pump with a hose clamp, and you run this tubing up and you can drill a hole through the rim joist and run it to the outside. As the condensate pump fills up with water from the Sanidry, a little pump in here automatically turns on to pump the water out. The Sanidry has an on or auto switch here, and the auto switch is the position that you want to leave it in. In the on position, the fan will be running all the time. So someone might want that if they wanted to circulate air and filter it all the time. But the auto position is where the fan only runs when the dehumidification part of the unit runs. When the compressor comes on because the humidity is high, then the fan will come on. When the compressor goes off because the humidity has dropped down, the fan will shut off. So the auto position is the position you should leave this switch in. The Sanidry also has a dehumidistat switch here, and it's best to leave this setting in the middle. You can crank it down so that the Sanidry runs a lot and keeps the relative humidity down to as low as 30%. But there's no point in keeping the relative humidity below 60%. Mold will not grow below 60%. And if you try to keep the relative humidity in your basement down below that, you're just adding electricity and expense to something that's not really a problem below 60%. So keep it in the middle setting and you're good to go. Don't have to adjust it really ever. Another great thing about the Sanidry is that you don't have to locate it in the space that you're drying. For example, if you had a basement that was partially finished and partially unfinished, you can locate the Sanidry in the unfinished area and duct the damp, dirty air into the Sanidry and duct the dry, clean air out of the Sanidry back into the finished space with two duct kits, an upper duct kit and a lower duct kit. So what you do is you simply locate the Sanidry in the unfinished area on the other side of the partition between the finished area and unfinished area. And what you'd probably do is turn it at an angle. So if the partition was running this way, the Sanidry would be pointing parallel with the partition wall. And the reason for that is so that we can get at least a 90-degree bend in the flex duct on the blowing side to quiet the Sanidry. If we duct it straight and direct through the wall, you'll have that blower noise. But if we have at least a 90-degree bend in the flex duct, then we'll cut the blower noise down quite a bit. The lower duct kit consists of 4 parts. We have this adapter ring, and it has little tabs that get bent to the inside, as you can see, and then we will screw them to these 4 holes. Now these 4 screws that are already in here hold the blower inside the case, so don't remove these 4 screws. These extra 4 holes are where you put this adapter ring on with 4 sheet metal screws. And then you'll simply take your flex duct and wrap it around there with some tape, and then you use this sheet metal boot. You'll put it between the studs and mark the size of it. Take a drywall saw, cut a hole in the drywall, stick this between the studs, and put a nail or a screw in the stud on each side. And then on the finished side, you'll take a grill and you'll screw the grill right to the drywall, through the drywall into the studs with 2 screws, 2 white-headed screws that are provided through these 2 holes. Now on the upper duct, you'll run the grill this way. So when someone looks up, they can't see into the sheet metal boot. If you had it this way, someone could see up inside in the metallic metal of the sheet metal boot. So you run it this way, and then it blows the air upward toward the ceiling. On the lower duct kit, you'll do the opposite. You'll run it this way so the homeowner can't see inside the sheet metal boot. So those are the 4 parts to the lower duct kit, which is the blowing side. So you have a ring adapter, a section of flex duct, the sheet metal boot, and a grill. For the upper duct kit, you have 4 parts as well. 3 of the same parts, a grill, a sheet metal boot, and a flex duct section. And this part, which is unique to the top of the Sanidry, it's a hood where you peel off the double-sided tape and you stick this to the top of the filter rails. And then you'll take your section of flex duct, stick it on the 8-inch side. The 6-inch side has a cap in it. You can leave that cap in there. This is for if someone wanted to take fresh air from the outside and add it to the house. Rather than having a fan blowing air into the house, it's unconditioned air, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too wet, it may have dust and bugs in it and so forth. someone could take this cap out and run a 6-inch duct to the outside, so they'll be sucking most of the air from the return for the Sanidry, from the rooms that you're dehumidifying, and some of the air from the outside. And then you're blending them together, you're filtering the air from the outside, you're dehumidifying it, you're tempering it, and then blowing it as clean, dry air into the building. That's what this side is for. We typically don't use that feature, so we'll keep it capped. Even if a basement doesn't leak groundwater, it needs a Sanidry. Let me explain. You see, what causes high relative humidity in a basement, besides moisture coming through the concrete, water wicking through the concrete, groundwater seepage, and of course plumbing leaks, well, besides all that, we have air coming in from the outside and condensing on the cool basement surfaces. You see, a house breathes. Warm air rises. It rises in the winter because we heat the air with our furnace or our boiler artificially with fossil fuels. And the air rises, warm air rises in the summertime through solar heating of the air in the house. So air escapes out of the upper levels of the house. Now we can't create a vacuum in a house, so we need new air coming in to replace the air that escaped. So basically your house is blowing air out the top and sucking air in at the bottom. So our basement is sucking air in from the outside. Now in the wintertime, we have an energy penalty if we let air in from the outside, certainly. We can't prevent it 100%. But in the wintertime, the air is cold outside. Cold air is small air. When we bring it to the inside, we heat it, and the relative humidity drops. Why? Because the relative humidity goes down by 2.2% for every 1 degree that we heat the air. So in other words, that translates into, in the wintertime, we don't really have much of a moisture problem relative to condensation and humidity in the air because our heating system is drying our house out. However, in the winter, it's the opposite. You see, summertime air is big air. It's really hot air. It could be 80 degrees, 85 degrees or more. And it has high relative humidity. When the house sucks that air inside, it cools the air. Did you know that the earth temperature in your state is the average outdoor air temperature year-round? In other words, clearly the average outdoor air temperature, the temperature of the earth, is lower than the summertime temperature. So that's why when you suck hot, humid air into the basement, it gets cooled because the surfaces of the basement underground are cool. Well, that's how we get condensation and damp, funky, moldy smells in our basement in the summertime because we sucked warm, humid air in and then cooled it, raised the relative humidity, caused condensation, caused high humidity, and mold is having a party, dust mites are having a party on floors upstairs. And unless you have a finished basement, you wouldn't have dust mites in the basement because you don't have people shedding skin in the basement, and that's what they live off of. But clearly we have mold and funny smells, and we have a basement that we really are not happy with, that we can't use in the summertime because of the high relative humidity. The Sanidry is the answer. The Sanidry CSB has all the same technology as the upright Sanidry, except everything's a little bit smaller and a little bit more compact so that we can fit it into a smaller space, such as a crawl space. The Sanidry CSB is rated at 90 pints compared to the Sanidry upright, which is rated at 100 pints. As you can see, the Sanidry is really a basement miracle machine, but there's reasons for it. The big cold coil surface area, the heat exchange core, and the big blower are 3 of the biggest reasons why the Sanidry can outperform any dehumidifier on the planet.